as a Stoic, I mean, it's like this encouragement to figure everything out for yourself. The reward is supposed to be you get along better than you would otherwise, but you have made yourself different in having a Stoic perspective. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Me too. And I wanted to start with a philosophical question that you pose to your students sometimes, which is, what should a Stoic drive? Should a Stoic drive a Hyundai or a Mercedes?
Yeah, someone got mad at me about this the other day, and he's going to make a case for Teslas.
Ah, sure. Yeah, that's a third argument. Let's consider all three. But what do you think?
Well, I am with the Stoics on this because I just ask everyone I can, so maybe you can refute this. But once you get a nice car, you become a nice car guy. So my student even, I think I won this argument already because he admitted he's a Tesla guy. And then you have less freedom because, as you can see, I test this all the time. The guys with nice cars are embarrassed in the normal cars. They look around like someone might see them. They'll say no to the ride. So, so it's actually, replacing some of what you could think about yourself without the car. It's going to give you more status, more of a thrill. But I think those things can take away from what you could do for yourself. Yeah.
There's a story I tell in the Discipline book about Cato, one of his heroes. I'm forgetting his name, but basically these men are sent to bribe this Roman politician. And, he welcomes them into his relatively small house, and they walk into the kitchen and he's there boiling turnips. And they go, it's a dead end trying to bribe this guy. He doesn't care about money. And there is, I think, a certain independence that comes from deliberately and proactively rejecting certain luxuries in life.
Yep. And it may not be a person's weakness. I know all of this, but you know yourself, so you can stave off becoming dependent on something making you feel too important that's external to you. If you know that's your weakness. And then one thing that's so flexible about Stoicism is if that's not your weakness, you could be gold dripped all over you, and it's not going to make any difference because you could toss it off at a moment.
Yeah, I feel like Marcus Aurelius would say you should drive the Hyundai or you should walk. Cato would say you should walk. Marcus Aurelius would say drive the Hyundai. And Seneca would say drive whatever you can afford. Drive the nicest car that you can reasonably afford.
The nicest, but what about, the warning about gold wine goblets, it's like the nicest, but not an impressive car, because you don't want to be impressive for the wrong reasons. And I also, if you have too nice a car, you do think of yourself differently than other people. And then you've just lost it all. To me, the most valuable thing is really feeling like a brother or sister to everybody. And there are some ways that you become intimidating or, you don't seem like one of. So I worry about that.
No, it's hard to feel like you're just like everyone else as you pull into valet in a Ferrari or a Lamborghini.
Yeah. And people want to because you even see them try. But it's not, it's like too late at that point. It's too late. Well, my husband's, he takes the bus. He takes the bus when he travels. And it's then there's no effort. Do you know what I mean? It's not I'm making this up. You literally, get all the secrets and get treated like one of if you travel on the bus.
Well, I was thinking about this because the first car that I ever bought with my own money, I was just starting college. I bought a Hyundai and then I sold it and I bought a much cheaper car a few years later. But now I do drive a Mercedes. It's 7 years old. And I bought it used, and it's diesel. It gets super good gas mileage, whatever. It was expensive, but it wasn't there are more expensive Hyundais than what I paid for this car.
Right,
I would say. But I remember one of the reasons that I bought the car, and maybe this is the rationalization, but I would be curious what you think about it, is I was driving to the airport early one morning. I live in rural Texas. I'm driving to the airport. I was driving a 2008 Toyota Tacoma. And I was right near the F1 track, which is where the Circuit of America's races. You see all these super fancy cars come in. But they're even building an apartment complex on this racetrack that you can park. It's a luxury condo high rise for your car. Because, like these Saudi princes and stuff that bring their cars to race in this track. Anyways, I'm driving by. It's early in the morning, and I hit this puddle, and my car sort of hydroplanes. And in this moment, the car is shaking. I feel like it's going to tip, and the tinness of my of my old Toyota, it struck me in this moment that why was I driving a less safe, less new car when I could easily, without even thinking about it, buy not just a nice car, but a car with the fanciest protections in it.
Yes,
and it was a no-brainer to me.
Yeah, I get that. That's why I use the Hyundai as an example, because of course, you'd want it to be safe. I mean, my students and I we convinced ourselves that you could have a car as a Stoic, so we did get to that. And then again, it's such a flexible view. Like, what's working for you? I mean, as long as all these options are presented, it's like, are you feeling enough of a similarity with normal people? Are you in a car that's making you distracted by feeling unsafe?
Epictetus said that philosophy wasn't this dry, abstract thing. It was a thing, he said, you should be talking about, writing down, reading about, exploring with other people all the time. He said, constantly have it at hand. That's how I think about philosophy. And it's weird. For the last 5 years, every single day, I've been writing this free email about Stoic philosophy. It's been not just cool to meet all these fellow practitioners of Stoic philosophy, but in writing about it, talking about it, reading it for our podcast, I have got to internalize these ideas in a way that I never would have been able to under any other circumstances. That's the idea. Philosophy is something we're supposed to engage in, not keep in these dusty old books or read once and be done with. It's a constant process. And I think that's why the email has worked so well for the people reading about it and sharing it and talking about it, all of that as well. So I'd love to have you join us on this email. You can sign up at dailystoic.com/daily email. It's totally free, no spam. You can unsubscribe whenever you want. I've basically given away a book for free every single year for 5 years, and I'm gonna keep on doing it until I drop dead. Check it out, dailystoic.com/daily email. Well, to go to the Tesla argument, I drive this car most days. My wife drives an F-150, and we both would very much like an F-150, the electric one, because it can charge your house, and it's electric, which is obviously better for the environment. We drive a lot, and this goes to the third part of your argument, which is actually should a Stoic have an electric car instead? And I think if you're making the environmental argument, of course you obviously should. And then we went to the dealership and we looked at the price tag of this electric car. The base model is currently priced, because of the various shortages and the logistical crisis. The base model of the F-150 Lightning that you could actually get your hands on, so not in theory, but like what's going for at the dealership, is $107,000, and that was where my interest in supporting the environment ran headlong into my Stoic sort of financial frugality.
Right. Yeah. You did some cost benefit analysis.
Yes.
No, that's great. I do think I've explained that recently to students that it can be frustrating because you don't get an answer from Stoicism. There isn't one answer. And I've had even ethicists ask me, worried about flying to conferences, that kind of the same kind of
Sure.
question, what's best for the environment. And it is kind of a frustrating answer to say, well, why don't you go first and figure it out? But I do think that's, we figure out what works, then we advertise it. Other people check us, are we being consistent? Have we missed something? I think that, publicizing what we're doing can be really helpful. But yeah, it's a frustrating answer, especially when ethics is treated like, someone who, some people know the formula and they can just do some calculations and return with what's right.
Yeah. No, it not only do the Stoics sort of just pose these things as questions, or we get this, like in Marcus Aurelius's case, we're only getting the ethical quandaries that he personally had, right? He's not even thinking about it like an academic philosopher that's going, what about this? What about this? What about this? He's going, well, today I was dealing with this, and so that's what I'm talking to myself about.
Yeah.
But I think the really tricky part with the Stoics is then Seneca comes along and he answers the questions quite brilliantly, and then acts totally differently in his personal life. And then you're just like, oh, well, Seneca had 300 ivory tables that he used for entertaining in parties. So you're like, this is the guy that says slavery resides under marble and gold, and then throws Gatsby-esque parties at his mansion subsidized by Nero. And you're just like, but what am I supposed to do about what kind of car I should drive?
Yeah. I just think that's really a puzzle. I really would not expect someone to be interested in that, in presenting one, set of recommendations and not following them. I would feel like that would really be, unattractive. And I would assume friends would call you out on that. I don't know. I really don't understand.
It's tricky. I do feel like he wrestles with it a little bit. I think his argument is that wealth is a preferred indifferent, right? So if you can afford a nice car, why not do it? You don't get to take the money with you when you die. But then he also says, he says a philosopher can be rich provided that the money is not stained in blood. And you're like, is there money more stained in blood than the fortune you derived working for Nero?
Yeah, right. I think I am a little embarrassed by examples like that because Stoicism gets associated with, being so comfortable and defending status quo, like social arrangements. I was really thrilled with a new book called Existential Flourishing by Irene McMullen. And she suggested that when we look at virtue ethics, we really think of one component of our practical rationality is focused on justice. And I was like, here we go. Wouldn't that be nice? Some norms about justice. Of course, they'll be uncomfortable for everyone to live up to, but it has, it is missing, isn't it?
And at the same time, I think philosophy can often, I'm reading Peter Singer's new book, or he republished the one about the life you can save. And it's like, if you start to think about what your money, once you begin to think about how your money can be used for good, almost every extraneous thing becomes so morally fraught as to be almost paralyzed. Like there was one effective altruist I was reading about who was saying that things should be priced in terms of how many children's lives could be saved at the same amount. If you're buying a $200 backpack, but you could also for $200 buy a mosquito net that would save the life of a child in Africa, are you telling yourself it's $200, this backpack, or are you telling yourself that the backpack is actually one dead African child, which is philosophically and rhetorically quite provocative, also would be impossible to go through life if that was one's frame of view.
Yeah. We would have no markets. That's I used to explain Singer by talking about the sparkles in toothpaste, the little things that we come to expect that where the resources could be used otherwise. But the Stoics are pretty pro-market, I think, because of the benefits of general affluence. That I understand better than Seneca's hypocrisy or misdescriptions of himself.
Yes.
I just think of markets as like natural phenomenon. I mean, they aren't going to be ideal. The people we want to win aren't going to win, but they are sustaining when it comes to, just general affluence, general survival, as strange as they are.
Well, no, I think that's an interesting point, the Stoics and the markets, because, the Stoics were in the market, right? Zeno sets up the Stoa in the Athenian Agora, right? Literally in the market. And the difference, I would say, between that choice and the choice of, say, the Cynics is about participation, right? Do you look at this thing and you say this is hopelessly corrupt and broken, and actually the only moral choice is to opt out entirely, or do you try to find kind of a reasonable and practical middle ground within a complex, morally fraught world, and do the best that you can? I would argue the Stoics say that. Marcus in Meditations, he goes, stop going around expecting Plato's Republic.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, some of the work I've been trying to do is trying to come up with norms for the marketplace where we kind of replace. I mean, I know you know this, but we really get told a lot of stories about markets, don't we? Like about ownership and rights and meritocracy and stuff, and they just don't hold up. Like I don't find many people actually pushing them in real life because they know of all these exceptions, or their own story will be an exception. So yeah, I've been trying to articulate a norm for what we're doing in markets. And it might be, I'm just thinking, we really are contributing to information when we participate in the price system, information other people use immediately. And it's good if it contributes to affluence generally long term. And, that's really rough and approximate. It doesn't make any one activity necessary. It's not like, sorry, guys, I have to make this trade. I mean, no urgency like that is attached to any particular business behavior, but it does kind of complement the system is sustaining over time. And I want more affluence in the world. So I think of markets as a promising way to get us more affluence in the world, even with, all the unfairness that you just described. That's part of them.
Well, one of the things I think about too is it's you can accept the market as a mechanism, as a means of pulling people out of poverty, creating global affluence, all of that, and you can see it for what it is. And then I think the Stoics would say, just as the Stoics would say, look, there's this institution, and Marcus Aurelius probably would have preferred Rome to be a republic, but it wasn't. So would Seneca. But then one gets to, the Stoics would say, decide how you are going to behave as an individual inside that system. So how are you going to behave as a business person? How are you going to behave as a customer? This is where we have the most individual choice. And at least that's what I try to think about with the stuff that I make is okay, how am I going to make it? I just went through this choice where we do these, we're actually just rolling out a leather-bound edition of Meditations that I got the rights to. And I had a manufacturer in Belarus that could make them quite affordably. We had a great relationship. I like the quality of it. But then Belarus is indisputably complicit in the invasion and looting of Ukraine. And the decision about, well, do I want to do business with a person in that country? No. But that decision to switch to a different one means that I now pay about 2.5 times as much per copy. And so I think, to me, that where I don't control what's happening in Ukraine, I don't control globalization, blah, blah, I don't control any of that, but I do control who I decide to do business with within reason.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, that's exactly what I was hoping happened if people thought like Stoics about markets, that you could opt out and do things differently, even when other people were just emphasizing the loss. I mean, economists do that a lot to me. I mean, they, as if all we can focus on is the loss there. that always seems so strange to me that they see us in agreement, as if there's only one perspective and we're supposed to generate surplus all the time. You aren't playing your role unless you're generating surplus. But of course that's not true. But the Stoics, I just think they're helpful with the notion that external goods, money, markets, they're all indifference to virtue, just because it gives you a chance to pull away from those prudential calculations. I mean, that's, a lot of us don't ever do that. We only think in terms of practicality. And so that you're able to see what would be practical or maximize surplus and then choose something else. Like, I just think that's sophisticated. Like, that's the goal.
Yeah. And I think, we often get very distracted, both as, I think, philosophers, but as people, with these sort of abstract questions about like, is globalization good or bad? And then it's like, but you're just buying stuff off Amazon that they made in China, right? So it's like you're acting as if Jeff Bezos is the one who is the only one with moral decisions on his hands, and then you're condemning him for the decision that he made, as if you're not faced with a countless number of smaller but actually lower stakes ethical and moral questions about how you participate in the markets. And you are, you're like, should Adidas fire Kanye West? And then you're like, but you're totally ignoring, who you do business with, how you do business, you're wearing Kanye West clothes at this moment as you're condemning Adidas for not breaking ties with this person.
Yeah. It's supposed to be difficult, right? I mean, it's like, it's not supposed to be a fun debate between my middle schooler is big into those big proclamations about things being wrong. And then, she does not examine. I've been trying to point out to her exactly what you just said, how much, we're participating in what she's like decrying to her friends. But I love Stoicism for that too. It's like, sorry, we can't simplify it.
Well, and I wonder how much of that for the Stoics came from their own rude awakening, right? Like, so they begin as these kind of like gadflies, right? They're like talking about things, and every once in a while they'll advise a powerful person, but as Stoicism goes from Greece to Rome, and then the philosophers go from these thinkers to being senators and consuls and then emperors, they're like, oh, like now we're making the decisions. And it turns out it's complicated and there's a lot of factors that you have to weigh. Yeah. And I can't be so glib about this because, it's an imperfect world and there are only imperfect solutions.
Yeah. And if we are glib, even then, as long as we incorporate it and justify it, into our practical rationality, something we actually practice or test with others, I feel like that's even safe too. You have to start somewhere, but then you pay attention to the feedback. I've been amazed by how phronesis, which used to be, I really feel I got laughed at for saying phronesis a few times at ethics conferences. It is like on fire right now. It's in moral education, so common. I was at a conference this weekend. I feel like I heard it talked about 100 times. Apparently in business research, like business ethics, phronesis is a really big deal. Unless I'm remembering
walk people
wrong.
Through what that means.
Well, phronesis would be like the Stoics use phronesis as the idea that you need a thinking person to work these things through, so nothing will be static, no formula, no set of, 10 rules that don't need explanation or something. We might have rules, we might say glib things, but we're going to have someone to put it in context. And work out the puzzles and then, really test it in your own life because it's easy to say things, hard to live up to things. And it was always kind of ignored. I think Aristotelian virtue ethics really left it out for a few decades. It's kind of, an ugly word. Aristotle's not real clear about it. The Stoics are a lot more clear about it. But I'm thrilled that I mean, maybe it seems like common sense, but I'm thrilled it's no longer absent and getting a lot of attention. Psychologists are also looking at it now. It's Christian Christensen has, with these other researchers, come up with kind of a 4-part account of Aristotelian phronesis. They're kind of more Aristotelian than Stoic. That is going to be, I mean, capable of being operationalized. They're going to do interventions to test it. I mean, it's like on the playing field. And I really did used to get laughed at for bringing up an ancient idea in any like contemporary context.
Well, I think, people thought and have thought for a long time that philosophy is this kind of abstract, impractical thing. And I do think it's been cool to see this resurgence and to read some of your writing where it's like, no, these are precisely the questions that philosophers should be helping people answer, and that regular people need to be thinking about these things. That philosophy isn't this thing that you do in the safety of a classroom, but it's actually how you do it in your life. Yes.
And the questioning. I mean, yeah, we all have to question everything. It's like we need everyone to do that. The more the better.
Yeah. Like you opened that paper that you sent me that I read where people were like, oh, this is all very interesting, but do you actually use it in your life? Like they were almost shocked that Stoicism had practical applications. This is what I was reading into it, that Stoicism had practical implications because so little of philosophy seems to.
Yeah, that's interesting. That I wonder if that was the Hyundai thing, but yeah, I mean, I try and use it. I don't seem like a Stoic, so that's always a challenge. And
you're not an old white guy or a bro.
I'm not a bro. Yeah. I mean, it's funny how there's so much overlap now and so much uptake in like the athletic community. When it comes to Stoicism, I mean, I just find that so fascinating. And one thing I've noticed, I mean, I'm so curious about what you've figured out, because you're really seeing what people take up when it comes to Stoicism. And they're just, obviously they're focused on athletes so much, heroes, Aristotle too, but like these are the examples. And so it does make sense that contemporary people who focus so much on, physical excellence would find it resonant. But are there parts they don't like? I mean, part of it seems very scoldy to me. It does fit well with being an old mom. I mean, there's not like a bad fit when it comes to me. So I just wonder if there are parts that aren't appealing to the people who are following you on Instagram and Fitspiration.
I mean, definitely. Because I feel this. It's like, look, and sometimes people assume that I only want to talk about the parts that people want to talk about, but no, I experience it like so. If I want to talk about how Stoicism helps one be more disciplined or more resilient, or ignore insults or criticism, how to sort of be more powerful, people are sort of all about that. And then if I go, hey, the philosophy also talks about why you should give a shit about someone in the middle of a pandemic. People are like, why are you politicizing Stoicism?
Right. Yes, right.
As if the Stoics weren't literally politicians, and if discipline and justice weren't next to each other in the 4 cardinal virtues.
Right. Yeah. I mean, speaking of markets, I mean, I don't know if you see it this way, but one thing I forgot to mention is that, if we care about other people, we just care about other people. It's not just like however we can reach them through markets. It's, we just want people to be doing well, like in general, all people. That's so interesting. I would expect people wouldn't like all the components of Stoicism. I mean, it just would be so surprising if it was palatable to people right away, because it's so counterintuitive. There's just so much that's different than we get, from common sense. Like, I guess athletes really know what it's like to sacrifice, long-term payoff, that type of thing. But of course, it's going to be harder to relate to people when you're that special.
Yeah, of course. I think it's important that we have to realize that the discipline, that the virtues are not independent of each other, right? So the sacrifice that goes into, dieting and training and delayed gratification and all of that stuff that makes you, able to hit a ball really far or, to run really fast. If that's the only outcome of the training that you're doing, you're probably losing track of where justice and wisdom, act as a check against that virtue. Right.
Yeah,
and so
right.
like, I think I've talked about this before and people probably get mad that they will get mad to bring it up, but I'll prove the point by bringing it up. Like, is there a certain courage in deciding I'm not going to get vaccinated despite the health consequences, but two, the moral outrage, potential economic punishments, the anger of the crowd, right? Is there a certain courage in standing alone and saying, I'm not going to do this thing, you can't make me? I guess, right? I mean, that would be a scary thing. And we should probably we should probably respect that in isolation. But the Stoics would say justice and wisdom, right? You're choosing to die on a hill that's based on no scientific evidence whatsoever.
Right.
And then two, you are choosing to think only of yourself and not how your decisions impact what the Stoics refer to as the common good. And so therefore, the act of courage is not virtuous, it is morally bankrupt. Yeah. And I think people want to pick and choose from the Stoics using only the parts that make them better at what they want to get better at. And I think it's easy to ignore the duties and obligations and responsibilities inherent in being a person of the world.
Yeah, explaining yourself. I mean, explaining why you don't trust the research that exists, when, which exact research you don't trust, why people would still use the same medical system, same doctors, but believe that they're wrong about this. Just explain yourself. Like, I'd be open to the argument, but as far as I heard, primary care physicians got none of that and did a lot of begging. And you can always opt out. I would admire that, someone who completely opted out.
Well, they're willing to opt out of the vaccine, but not the medical treatment,
not the system,
when they inevitably need it.
Right. The system that they're like burdening and insulting. Yeah. I think that's wrong. I just think that's like plain wrong. It put the clinicians in a bad position.
Well, of course, and so that's where I think Stoicism gets interesting in its popularity, is that people are really interested in the parts that challenge them in some ways, but then when they get challenged in other ways, like the political tribe that they belong to, or the comforts that they're accustomed to, or having to sacrifice or do things on behalf of people they don't know or people they don't like, then all of a sudden, who are these people to tell me what to do, right? And I guess I've just said, like, the purpose of Stoicism is not to make you a better sociopath.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I can see how really strong, physically excellent people really will see themselves reflected in Stoics' description of good. But yeah, you'd have to internalize the whole thing to really be using Stoicism, and also focus on your weaknesses, like you just said. And I actually had a question. I'm just so like into your work and what you're doing. I talk about it all the time. All my students follow you. All my kids' friends follow you. But I'm surprised people don't need from you more advice on how to get along with others.
Oh, interesting.
Like, I've been working on kind of the self-conception of police is one thing I've been looking at from a kind of Stoic lens. And I feel like some self-conceptions can lead to predictable, like, tensions, so I'm just, of course, suggesting we all think of ourselves as progressors towards virtue. And what I hear over and over and over is that it's really difficult on relationships to play that role in society. It's like, that's so fascinating. I mean, so your self-conception can have an impact on, I would think of it as the Stoic good of harmony, and I'm surprised there isn't more like requests for help with that. I don't know if people don't have problems or, sorry.
My father was a police officer, and
no way.
Like I have just, as a result of that, like a real intense dislike for what you might call sort of like cop energy, the sort of like, well, I'm the enforcer of the law. I'm also the interpreter of said law.
The authority is here.
I have the feeling of carrying a weapon around. I have I am trained to be suspicious of other. That kind of energy. I just really like. Whenever I can sense how triggering it is to when I hear whatever other manifestations of it in life are. But one of the things I think about from the Stoics that I have tried, like I think, if you think Stoicism is kind of about an indifference or a superiority, you're missing what I think Marcus Aurelius talks about most beautifully in Meditations, about being strict with yourself, tolerant with others, about really trying to practice empathy, really trying to be tolerant, leave mistakes to their makers, kind of the opposite of that cop energy, even though he's coming from this place of absolute authority and the ability to deal out life and death. So that doesn't corrupt and destroy his character. I think that's why he's talking about empathy and love and compassion and all these things over and over again, is because he doesn't want his heart to harden up, which I think is what tends to happen to people in positions of that kind of authority of the state. Is you just start to look at other people as the enemy or as almost parasites, and you end up destroying yourself in the process.
Oh, yeah. That metaphor, maybe your dad was against this too, because I meet a lot of officers who they also are like you. They're like, oh, come on, that's not going to work on me. You know what I mean? It's just like, look at that. But there's that metaphor that police are the sheepdogs and the rest of us are sheep. Yes. And they're like, And it's so, I contrast that to Stoicism. It's like, it's probably better we not think of ourselves as sheep or sheepdogs or wolves. Yes. It's just like, those things are powerful. They really are attractive and powerful. They'll work in our thinking. And we should probably should avoid that classification for our own good, agree. For others' good.
No. You think about the self, the identity encaptured in, say, like the Blue Lives Matter flag, right? Which is there's that thin blue line in the flag that's supposedly protecting the people from disorder and chaos. They are seeing themselves as this sort of agent of order and power, as opposed to something like they are inherently seeing themselves as the embodiment of violence on behalf of people, as opposed to like a shield, right? A shield would be I think a more apt metaphor. This is in obviously the Roman Empire goes through this too. The view you have to have of yourself to justify being a hegemon is, probably one of those masks that eats at the face, to borrow that expression.
Oh, wow.
It's inherently corrupting.
Yeah. That's so interesting. So it's never supposed to be easy, right? So if you're always sure you're on the right side, there's no way. And then the mask that eats at your face is so amazing, because one thing I've looked at is how a lot of the codes of ethics for police departments are so ridiculously demanding. It's hard to believe it's not kind of tongue in cheek. So it'll be things like, always is helpful, acts with the utmost, Stoic kind of sounding things, but also like completely unrealistic for any person, let alone like a 24-year-old. And, that's, what I'm against. Like, I see the Stoics as, they inspire us in some ways. Wow, we can try to be good all the time. Like, really? Like, acting normally, we can try to be good. Yeah. But I also see them, and I've looked at Vice Admiral Stockdale on this. They also deflate, a good Stoic will deflate these ridiculously demanding expectations that we really buy and are told about. And, I think those are incredibly destructive. And the shame people have when they don't live up to high. I mean, I kind of think this across the board. Like, Stoicism can keep us from having, it's so demanding, but it can keep us from having like harmfully demanding accounts, imposed on us or internalized by us. And I know people don't think that way all the time. Yeah.
Because I mean, one read of Meditations, I've talked about this before, is Marcus Aurelius is not setting impossible standards for himself. He is struggling to meet the standards that he has set for himself. So when Marcus says, like, Marcus isn't saying, let's say he's talking about temper. So if we realize that he's writing to himself with no view towards publication, then he's probably talking about, when he says, you've got to stop losing your temper or whatever, he's not lecturing someone else.
Right.
He is admonishing himself after having lost his temper. Right.
Yeah.
So if we see the Stoics, like we were talking about Seneca as this hypocrite earlier, I mean, maybe Seneca had a sense that he was falling short and that this was something he was really struggling with. And it's only because only his essays and letters survived, none of his internal thoughts or admissions, that we don't get how much he wrestled with that thing.
That's so good. That's so great. He's like, what do I do with all this ivory?
Yeah, exactly.
How do I unload all this ivory? Yeah, I like that. And that's how Stoicism helps me. It like kind of lowers expectations. I mean, there's a lot of stuff I don't care about that, my friends care about. Like because I try and focus on Stoicism and I kind of buy it, it's just hard to get caught up in things that really, I mean, a lot of perfectionism. I wanted to ask you about that because you're so productive and you're so inspirational when it comes to, getting the obstacles out of, I shouldn't say obstacles, but, realizing what you can accomplish in a day using the obstacles, that I would think perfectionism would be a burden or a temptation.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I don't think perfectionism is really my issue. I do, I think I struggle more with, like, I sort of set certain output goals or like a level of performance, and then I have trouble not seeing those as set in stone, right? And so like I'll get into a rhythm and I won't necessarily perceive how I am burning myself out by like sticking to that rhythm, or more often burning other people out by sort of expecting, them to keep up with me as I do that.
Oh, that's funny.
And so, realizing, like you already won. You already did most of what you set out. If you can't adjust your pace or relax a little bit, like what was the point of all of it? Yeah.
You don't want the task to take you over. You don't want to, you don't want to serve the task. Yeah. Right. But I mean, on the other hand, like setting goals, I mean, that's incredibly effective. When you were first saying like, you wear yourself out, I'm like, oh, okay, well, that sounds pretty stoic and fine. But then not if other people aren't enjoying it around you.
Yeah. It's just like, there's nobody's like, I think about this like as a very minor example. And I was just talking to Gary Vaynerchuk about this. Like, being punctual is important. It's rude to make people wait. It's good to, when you say, hey, I'm going to be there at 2, be able to have the discipline to know that means I need to leave by 1:15 and I need to travel promptly, etc. Being on time is important. But if your insistence on being on time makes you and other people miserable, or anxious because you have created a world in your head in which arriving at 2:03 p.m. is a moral sin or a personal failure. You have created a kind of strictness and fragility that will not allow you to flourish in a world where the vast majority of things, including when you arrive, is not in your control.
Yep. You've made yourself less free. You've kind of like given some of your identity over to this, idea you have about you being a person who's always on time. And then, as we age and stuff happens, I mean, that would be heartbreaking to, kind of lose what you associated yourself with. It's like they're almost preparing you for some future L's. Take the L, as the kids tell me.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that expression. I use it all the time now.
Dude, it's good.
Well, kids do help you with that too. Like, it's like, again, to go to punctuality. This is when it's like, okay, we told someone we would meet them at 2 p.m. and we get the kids in the car, do all the stuff, and then the kid falls asleep at 1:45 p.m. as you're getting close. Like, if you have decided that it's unacceptable for you to be late and you don't have the security to say, hey, sorry, our kid fell asleep, we're going to be 25 minutes late as we wait for them to wake up, you have now put the health/happiness of your kid in the back seat, literally, to, some arbitrary meeting time for something that you don't even have to do. So it's like, I think kids help you deal with, I heard one parent describe it as unavoidable reality.
Yes.
That they're just like, you're not in charge, man. And you never were. Right.
They're embarrassing. I mean, animals are embarrassing too. Pets are good for this too, but it's such a challenge. Like, I mean, that's such a balance, you want to have some expectations for everybody and ones that aren't, defendable all the way down. It's like, guess what? This is a social custom we abide by, you want to have, I was laughing with my students the other day. I make my kids dress up for church, I'm like, I'm sure they'd rather not do that, but, sorry, it's a social custom. I tell them sometimes, like, old people seem to really like this, as I'm like straightening bow ties and stuff, like, you're going to wear this thing. But I mean, if you want to be in harmony with other people, there's the problem of being a Stoic making you so odd. There are odd things about Stoics. So we're supposed to experience this harmony with others. And I get how we want to live up to our own expectations, social expectations. But as a Stoic, I mean, it's like this encouragement to figure everything out for yourself. The reward is supposed to be you get along better than you would otherwise, but you have made yourself different in having a Stoic perspective. I mean, I guess the Epicureans all lived together, and so kind of got around this problem, but Stoics were always around non-Stoics.
What do you see the relationship between Stoicism and your religion? I'm not sure what you are, but I get asked that question a lot. And as someone who is not religious, I don't always have a good answer. But how do you see those two things connecting to each other?
Pretty easily. Like, I'm probably not that good of a theologian, but I never really experienced any conflicts. And the way the Stoic approach helps me is with, I like the routine. I like the community. I like the focus on beauty. I like how much our church helps other people, and they've helped us too. I mean, I'm just into all of that, so I can't imagine life without it. And so I really don't see any tension. My advisor was like that too, Julia Annis. She didn't see any tension between the two. My students are always pointing out how religious the Stoics are. That's been their thing lately. They're like, don't skip over Zeus. Like, we'd like to talk about Zeus more, please. I definitely skip over, I just don't, that's not what I focus on in the Stoics, the divine.
They talk about God, the gods less than God, but there was clearly, I think the Stoics would have liked the concept of, or found agreement with the concept of a higher power, and if only because the concept of a higher power posits so clearly that you are not the highest power.
Right. Yeah. Right. That's right. And, the idea that you have to get your life organized and that you have a second nature. I mean, that's not so difficult to accommodate to, all sorts of religious beliefs. It's like we have some work to do on ourselves, participating in this larger system that, I'm very comfortable knowing I don't understand, on a minute by minute basis. But, the idea that you need to build that second nature in your character, I just hear it repeated all the time. Several religions.
Well, obviously the Stoics and their relationship with the Christians was not a good one. There's some irony that not long after the shoe is on the other foot, and then the Christians are the ones doing the persecutions of the philosophers.
Right.
But maybe there's a lesson there too of just sort of living and letting live.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. That would be a good book. That would be a really good book.
How do you, you mentioned this earlier, you said that you were a big fan and that your students were, which I appreciate. From my experiences, that would be the minority of academics in the philosophy departments. I don't know that my work is that well received among your
really?
colleagues.
Oh, no way. I mean, I talk a lot about Stoicism, but I've never heard a bad word. When we were graduate students, we knew we weren't the ones to do it, obviously, but we literally used to daydream about someone bringing this to people. I mean, just like hours and hours of together being like, how could this reach people? We knew it couldn't be through the work we were reading, like, no offense to that work, but
sure.
We knew it was not going to be through academic articles or even, for you to have made these primary texts of interest to people. I can't even go back and think of how impossible that seemed to me, because it's become true, and you're focused on doing all this reading and the reading recommendations. I mean, we really, once we started seeing what seemed right about Stoicism, that was like our, interest, and you've just done it. It's amazing.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, sometimes people go, "Oh, you'd be better off reading the originals," and I go, "By all means, you
could do that.
I would.
They're really easy. Yeah, they're so easy on your own. They need no explanation. I was thinking though, I'm glad you're not a professor, because listening to a bunch of podcasts of yours, you are not worn out like a professor. I mean, do you realize that? Like, if you were grading 100, I had 120 students last semester. There's just a kind of weariness. And when you have students who don't want to be there, which I have very few of, I mean,
sure.
In fact, I think that's happening less and less. I think students are starting to be there if they want to be there, but there's just something, professors seem so embattled to me often, and you're so fresh and the conversations are so great and organic, and the podcast, I've been like, oh, I'm glad he's not doing this in class.
Is that the grinding part of being an academic? Is
it's
just
really
like
a grind.
The load of the work?
Yeah, I've been surprised by it. I mean, it's so much like kind of it's so much repetition. It's a lot of like trying to motivate people who really don't want to learn. That's hard. I mean, it doesn't matter how old they are. It's hard. The like punitive nature of the tests, and it seems like young people are like getting better and better at advocating for themselves. I'm all for that. That's fine. But like,
sure.
I mean, they want to know why they missed half a point. They'd like me to put everything in percentages.
Sure.
I'm resisting, but it really does seem to wear people down, and you aren't speaking spontaneously. I mean, so if it's Wednesday, you're doing Epicurus, and you might not at all be in the mood to do Epicurus. I mean, I love it, and they give me a ton of feedback. It's always so like active. I mean, they get me thinking so hard. So I would do it for nothing, but we do basically do it for nothing, and it doesn't seem like people stay feeling fresh and excited about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's something about it too that I think would be hard, which is you're doing the same amount of work as me. Let's say if you give a lecture or you talk about something, but like the 120 people in the class, that's the scale at which that work is able to reach people. I think there's something invigorating that I have the advantage of, which is, hey, 500,000 people are going to open this email tomorrow. That there's something onerous and intimidating about it, but there's also something really exciting about knowing that, even a small thing that makes a small difference, since it's magnified over such a large amount of people, it could really have like a big impact.
Oh yeah. I mean, that just must be so gratifying, because I think that is part of it. I mean, my students are sweet as can be, I'm in South Carolina. Like I can't even like join in and complain about students, but you do get your feelings hurt by the one who, misses the question. We're really actively in charge of like what they're understanding. Sometimes I'll say something and then ask them what I said and they are blank. It's like, I just said it to you. I just said, I mean, we're
sure.
It's very active. And I think professors do get their feelings hurt way too often. But I'm glad you're doing it this way, and it just has such an impact. I had one last request, though. I just read your last book, and you even mentioned that not everybody is, I don't know what word you use, like is privileged.
Is this discipline?
Yes.
Okay.
We have all of them. But we've been trying to figure out if Stoicism would help at-risk kids in our community.
Sure.
You think so?
I think so. Well, I was thinking about it because, I sort of opened the book with an argument that we live in this sort of time of abundance and plenty. And the idea of you can pretty much do everything you want and you have access to all the things that you want. So self-discipline is very, very important. But it struck me as I was rereading the manuscript just how sort of first world and privileged that argument about self-discipline was. That this is how one makes sense of abundance. Because even amidst abundance, not everyone is experiencing that same abundance, right? And so I was thinking about that, and then I realized it's not fair, but actually people with less access, who are less privileged, self-discipline is even more important in the sense that the margin for error is lower and the stakes are higher. So like the idea that, a student of yours who has two married parents with two incomes, they got into a bunch of different schools, they can decide when they come to your class or not. And if they fail, then they can go to a different college. And if they fail out of that college, they can go to a different college. Like they have a certain amount that there are safety nets and safety nets for that person. But it's the first time, the first time student, first person in their family to go to college, the one paying for themselves, et cetera. This is the one who has to have the even more ironclad self-discipline, because if they fall short, there's less to catch them. And so I think seeing self-discipline as this thing that we all need, but the earlier we get it and the more we realize that, hey, we're on our own with this stuff. Like no one is actually looking out for you. And that's more or less true for different groups and different people in society, but no one is looking out for you. You have to be in charge of yourself. You have to be your advocate. You have to be your enforcer, because not only are people not looking out for you, there's probably a certain group of people that are looking forward to you failing, and you've got to figure this stuff out, and the sooner the better.
Yeah, right. That's great. We've been thinking about presenting it to kids at a high school we're volunteering at. I mean, I'm like a little uncomfortable talking about virtue with high school kids who have been through so much, but cognitive behavioral therapy is so close to Stoicism, and we're going to try and incorporate some of that. We're going to try it.
Well, I remember I read a study. Paul Tuff wrote this book. I think it's called How Children Succeed. And he was talking about, the marshmallow test, right? They do the marshmallow test to predict whether children can be successful. Do they have the ability to delay gratification? But he was saying that one of the problems with, let's say, a lower income child who has been burned by the system or people, they've had a hard life. when somebody comes in and sits in a room and says, hey, I'll give you one marshmallow now, but I'll come back later and give you 2 marshmallows if you don't eat the marshmallow. They're like, I don't trust this motherfucker. Give me the marshmallow now.
It's not even smart. It's not even prudent. I mean,
yes.
they're just aware. They're predicting properly whether they'll be treated well if they restrain themselves from the marshmallow. I know I worry about it because I see kids who have so little in our community far more disciplined than wealthier kids, and sometimes I worry they don't get a chance to be creative and take risks for that reason. Yeah. And I'm not sure these are like incredibly disciplined athletes. We have a friend who used to walk to practice miles, just a few years ago, walking miles. Now he's in juvenile detention. Like, I saw incredible levels of discipline, and then it still doesn't work out. I'm trying to teach critical thinking in these classes, and I love seeing the kids make guesses that are wrong, be real creative, because I think the stakes are so high that there's a lot of focus on drilling the right answer. Anyway, I'm fascinated by that, and I love that you have the kids book, and I'll keep looking for resources like that.
No, I think you make a good point, which is, the physical discipline is sort of step one. And a lot of athletes and a lot of people who have had tough lives have to develop a kind of a physical discipline. But then it's that emotional discipline, that cognitive discipline, that ability to not act on urges or impulses, not do something that in the short term feels like it'd be fun, and the inability to sit, to ignore, those kinds of things. Like, yeah. I think that's what Paul was saying in the book, which is like, as a privileged, kid, you get used to doing a bunch of stuff that doesn't matter. And you believe people who tell you that it does matter. Like tests, they don't matter.
Right.
But like you have to have a kind of a discipline to go, I know they don't matter, but this is the game that I have signed up for. And so I have to play by the rules of said game. That requires a kind of self-discipline that is difficult, I think, to cultivate if no one in your life has modeled that discipline for you.
Well, but let me suggest that we had a lot of horrific racism in people's lives in Charleston, South Carolina. So some of my most valuable contacts we call them like old timers. And it is amazing how many of them, some of them arrested as kids for protesting with MLK. I mean, just like, what? Sure. It's just like, yeah, they had our whole family and they're like, what? And they are so stoic. I mean, they aren't bitter. They were so hurt at the time. They will cite things like the Serenity Prayer. I've been recording a few of them. I should send you one recording. And the stoicism is there. I'll ask, I'll check. And then they're like, yeah, that sounds fine. That sounds fine. But I haven't seen that so much where people work their way into stoicism.
See, I totally disagree. Actually, I just read this book. It was very good. I just had him on the podcast. This is Tom Ricks's book on the civil rights movement called Waging a Good War. But anyways, one of the things that we don't talk enough about when we talk about the civil rights movement is we think of it solely as a moral movement based on ideas, which it was. But we ignore that every single one of these civil rights protesters was subjected to training. They were trained in nonviolence. Nonviolence being a moral and spiritual discipline that you have to practice. And they were even like the Million Man March, there was a list of rules that you had to agree to follow to participate in the march. And they said, if you have trouble with these rules, stay home, let us handle it. Okay. Right. And so I think we sometimes, we do the civil rights movement a disservice by not acknowledging that the very human impulse when someone punches you in the head or calls you a racial slur is to respond with violence or words or whatever. That, like when John Lewis falls on another protester to protect them from his body, this is the opposite of what you're instinctually going to do. This is a result of deliberate and very well thought out practice, which derives all the way from Gandhi. But I think we have to understand that this was a discipline that they were following. It wasn't just they were right and so magically were transcended their human limitations and were superhuman. They were like an athlete who had practiced for this moment of,
That's amazing, for this effective approach. You talk about that in Discipline is Destiny. Okay, now I remember. And so the theory comes first. That is so interesting. So you think the theory and practice comes first. That's so interesting.
Yeah, I just mean like they weren't just winging it out there. Do you know what I mean? Like this was all deliberate and planned, and they were seeking out provocations to then not be provoked by. And that I think that's having undergone that training in your 20s, now is still manifesting in these old timers that you're talking to. And they were part of this. It's like they were on a championship team that was transcendently great, and they have carried that energy with them. And I think today it's so much easier to be an activist because you just have to post something on the internet or whatever, that maybe we're not fully getting that training. And I think,
that's amazing.
One is made better by it.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive, but then it holds up. Wow, that's amazing. I never thought of that.
Well, this was an amazing conversation, and thank you so much for your work and kind words. And let's do it again. I'm sure you'll write something on. I imagine you have a book about Stoicism coming someday.
Yes, I do. It's hard to write a book.
It is. That's also a discipline.
I need to get more motivation from your sites. I really appreciate it. We are huge fans, like I said.
Well, hit me up when you write the book and we'll do this again.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.